and welcome to this workforce webinar. My name is Molly Cook with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, and I'm joined with Sarah Blaylock, also from the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, and we will help with technology today on this webinar. So if you're encountering any issues with Zoom, feel free to reach out to either myself, Molly Cook, or Sarah Blaylock in the chat. Today's topic is tips and tools for community-based organizations for supporting employers and hiring individuals with disabilities. As a reminder, all participants are currently in listen-only mode and cannot unmute themselves. If you have a question as this webinar proceeds, please feel free to post those in the Q&A box or the chat box. We get them either way. So whichever one you prefer, you can do that and we will address them. A reminder that this webinar is also recorded. The presentation recording and any materials you see today will be available on the Illinois Workforce Academy website and Illinois WorkNet within 48 hours. I did go ahead and post the presentation link in the chat box and will do so again later in this session. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar will be offering closed captioning and live transcription, so feel free to turn those on using your Zoom toolbar. At the end of this meeting and tomorrow, each of you will receive a follow-up email, which will include a survey asking you about the webinar, and filling that out helps us a lot in terms of providing future content. So if you could take a moment to do that today, tomorrow, or in the coming days, that would be great. And then a final reminder is that if you're experiencing any issues with accessing audio or a faulty internet connection, you can always call into this meeting. That has worked well in the past when there have been tech issues. And you can do that with the phone number that is on your meeting invite. So we're next going to go to 2 poll questions just to find out who is here with us today. So the first poll question I am going to launch is, what is your local area? You should see that popping up on your screen right now. And we'll take about 20 seconds to give everyone time to answer and then take a look. Okay, we have a great group here. I just looked and we currently have about 42 participants. So we have people from Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central, and Southern. So all areas of the state represented. That's great. Okay, and then our next polling question is, which partner do you best represent? And I will launch that poll here right now. We'll give it about 5 more seconds for those answers. Okay. So again, we have all titles present, as well as other partners and stakeholders and local workforce innovation board members. So thank you so much, and you'll be able to share a little bit more later about who specifically you are here with. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to our presenters today, starting with David Friedman.
Great, thanks Molly, and thanks again everybody for joining us. Really interested to discuss this with you. My name is Dave Friedman. I'm the chair of the disability subgroup of the Career Pathways for Targeted Populations work group within the IWIB, so part of the IWIB. And this is National Disability Employment Awareness Month. The theme for that's every October is designated as that. And the theme for this year is disability, part of the equity equation, which I think is really great as we start to think about DEI, increasingly starting to see organizations, companies that I run to in my business, starting to include disability on top of some of the other subgroups that they've been working with. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity to increase awareness and success of people with disabilities in the workplace. The goal of National Disability Employment Awareness Month is to celebrate the contributions of America's workers with disabilities and showcase supportive, inclusive, employment policies and practices. So that's what we're going to try to do a little bit today. It's very important that we discuss this topic. The unemployment rate of people with disabilities is 10.1% in the US. That's about twice the rate of non-disabled people. But that number's kind of deceptive because people with disabilities tend to have a much lower workforce participation rate than non-disabled peers. And so when you net that into it, what you find is only about 18% of adults with disabilities are employed versus compared to 61% of their non-disabled peers. So there's clearly a huge gap of people with disabilities either unemployed or who have exited the workforce for whatever reason. And of the ones that are working, many of them are working part-time. The part-time rate is about 29% for people with disabilities versus about 16% for non-disabled peers. And there's quite a lot, the federal government spends quite a lot of money on this problem nationally primarily through Title IV of WIOA. Illinois gets about $120 million a year through Title IV to spend on a variety of different programs for vocational rehabilitation and employment of adults with disabilities. And a lot of that money goes to DRS, and DRS last year in FY22 found almost 5,000 jobs for people with disabilities and is looking to increase that to 6,000 here in fiscal 23. But beyond the work that gets done by DRS, there's an awful lot of work that gets done by other people in the state. So employers who are looking to increase the diversity of their workforce, looking for high quality employees with low turnover, are another big part of the process, as well as community providers, different community organizations all around the state that help with deliver the training, the job coaching, and the support that allows people with disabilities to be successful once they enter new jobs. And today we're fortunate here in our webinar to have representatives of all three of those groups. So with that, I will take a moment to introduce the three participants. First, I'm going to introduce Marcus Deemer. Marcus is the Acting Manager of Workforce Development for the State of Illinois Division of Rehabilitation Services. Prior to this current role, Marcus has spent pretty much all of his career in rehabilitation, where he's been a job coach, a job club instructor, a regional placement manager, a voc rehab counselor, and a program director for projects in collaboration with industry. And over his entire career, a big part of his focus has been on implementing and improving the dual customer approach, so the idea that both the person with a disability and the employer are sort of customers of the system, and both of their needs need to be considered and integrated into any solution in order for it to be successful. Academically, Marcus earned an MS degree from Southern Illinois University Carbondale in behavior analysis and therapy, and a BS degree from Southern University A&M in Baton Rouge. So welcome, Marcus. Looking forward to your perspectives here today. Second, I'd like to introduce LaDonna Henson. LaDonna is the director of the Evaluation and Developmental Center at SIU in Carbondale. She's also been in the rehabilitation field for 25 years, serving both in state agencies as well as in community organizations. Before joining SIU, she worked 20 years in St. Louis, both with state VR as well as with a private agency. At that agency, she created a series of programs to help people with head injuries obtain the skills they needed to maintain successful employment beyond place. So beyond the placement, actually making sure that people could succeed long-term. And then based on the success of that program, the state extended it to anybody with a disability, as they found that same set of processes and approaches help people with cognitive and developmental disabilities, students, and youth with disabilities. And then 10 years ago, she left St. Louis and moved to Carbondale and brought that same program to the Evaluation Development Center, where she runs it still today. LaDonna received her master's degree in rehabilitation counseling from SIU in Carbondale and is a licensed clinical professional counselor and a certified rehabilitation counselor. And I should also note, LaDonna also served on the Illinois State Rehabilitation Council for many years including serving as the chair of that group up until June of this year. And I had the good fortune of working with her for at least a few of those years on that council. Our last participant brings sort of the third leg of the stool to this conversation. Garrett Rosiak is the Regional Supply Chain Continuous Improvement Manager at Ascendant. And Ascendant is a national distributor that has 30 distribution centers around the country, distributing a variety of B2B goods. And Garrett heads their national diversity and inclusion initiatives within the supply chain, so the section where most everybody in that organization works. And he brings to this job, which is relatively new for him, 12 years of experience working with people with disabilities, teaching and coaching. He's worked both in higher education and also in human resources. In his last job, and some of you may have heard this story, the story of the Bazaar Inc. Up here in Chicago, where he, over the time there, more than doubled the DEI workforce from 15% to 35% of employees. And he did this literally in the middle of a pandemic, with all of the struggles and hiring challenges there, from July 2020 to March 2022. And at the same time, not only did he increase the percentage, but significantly reduce the turnover among that group from 104% down to 58% over a course of a year. So I think we've got three people with really great perspectives on how the workforce system works successfully, how it combines the strengths of community providers, businesses, and the state. And I'm really interested in hearing their perspectives, both on things that are working really well, as well as on things that we could do to improve going forward. Next slide, please. So the approach we're going to take here today is we've asked each presenter to give a 5 or 10 minute presentation, just giving you a little more context about their job, about some of the things they've learned and some of the perspectives. Then we have a series of, I think, about half a dozen questions for the presenters that they've already seen. So a little more structured Q&A. And then we want to open it up to questions from the audience. We want to make sure that we're addressing the questions and things that you're curious about. So we want to make sure we have time for that here at the end. So with that, one last thing. As anytime you present to a group of any sort, it's always useful as the presenter to have some idea sort of who's on the other side of the screen. And so it would be great if people could just drop into the chat, just sort of who you are and what your role is in the workforce system. We learned a little bit of that earlier from the poll, but interested just kind of seeing who's on here so that we can make sure that as we think about our answers and our conversations that we're adapting to what your perspectives are. So great. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Marcus, who's our first presenter, and he's going to talk a little bit about DRS and the Workforce Development Unit.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Marcus Deemer. I'm the acting manager of the Workforce Development Unit. Our unit became active in fiscal year 2019 to address the vocational and business engagements, operations, and concern proposed by the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Prior to this, we were a regional concept where we did have placement individuals working in various areas. We did have a business venture in the past, but we opted out for regional and we started with the passage of WIOLA. We did go into our workforce development group. The biggest thing that we were dealing with was business engagements, or trying to increase our business engagements. And as we, in the next slide, please. What we consider business engagement is the interaction between employers, vocational rehabilitation services, other developmental organizations, that results in measurable gains in the desired outcomes for all parties. We're not just doing it because at one point we were just looking at what does VR look at, what does VR get out of it, or the VR customer. our new relationship is we're working more with our partners, working more with employers, and we are trying to make sure everybody has investment within the group. Next slide, please. We do have a slide, which is a bridge, partial bridge being done. Historically, when we talked about VR, the focus was on the needs of the individual with disability, more than the needs of businesses. We started looking at the fact that in order to increase our needs, we have to also look at the needs of employers. What is the employer getting out of the group? It should be a win-win situation. Also, we are going to the point of not only are we just looking at what it is for our customers, because when we start venturing out to other agencies, other partners, WIOLA partners, community agencies, we want to make sure the employer does have their needs being met. The biggest thing that we're finding out today, especially as a result of the pandemic, all employers are saying, I need someone to fill in the gaps. I need someone to do the job. So we're not only just looking at our customers, we're looking at everything, and we want to make sure we build a bridge for employers. The next slide. We work with the Division of Rehabilitation Services. We do a dual customer approach. The approach is not only, as I said, the needs of the individual with disability, but also the employer. And a lot of the needs are basically the same. The fact that the individual with disability needs employment. The businesses are needing employees. We're finding out that individuals with disabilities need some sort of supports in training. The businesses are looking for or need employers with certain skills. They're willing to train individuals. They're willing to assist. There may be concerns about employment. How does the individual with disabilities get to work? Are there some concerns about the equipment? There's some concerns about productivity. And if you notice on the bottom of the screen, it is a scale where we're trying to balance both the needs of the individuals and the businesses. And that is it for my presentation, Dave.
Great. Thanks, Marcus. And I think this group has been a big addition to DRS. And I know at the IWIB, across all 4 titles, one of our big focuses is business engagement. And this is just a great example of one of the titles and the initiatives that they've put forward around that. So great. So with that, we'll turn to LaDonna, who will give us an overview of the EDC and some of their experience and perspectives. LaDonna.
Thank you, David. I am from the Evaluation and Developmental Center. We're associated with Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. We are a very unique program in Illinois in that most of the services that we provide are only provided by us within the state. So we work with people from all over the state. Our mission is kind of threefold, which is to help individuals with disabilities so they can live and work independently in their community. We provide professional training for graduate students and research opportunities for students and faculty to continually develop innovative rehabilitation practices. We are also CARF accredited, which means that CARF is a accrediting body that really focuses on providing best services to people with disabilities. Next slide. So I'll just kind of briefly go through, some of the things that we do. As David said earlier, we really work with the people with the disability. And again, some of our services are very unique. We work with individuals of all ages. Some of our programs only work with youth with disabilities. A lot of our programs work with people of any age with any disability. One of the things that we do is we really look at, for both the business and the person with the disability side, looking at something very holistic. It really matters if you can get up in the morning and go to work and be on time in a whole lot of areas. If you can be punctual, if you do hygiene, if you have a place to live. I mean, all these things are really important in trying to have a successful job outcome. So one of the things that we do is we do a voc eval, which really helps people to define what their vocational goals are. What kind of job can they do that they will be successful in? We look at transferable skills. We do a lot of career exploration, and we establish really a concrete job path. We use a lot of academic achievement, aptitude, interest testing, but our main focus really is on career exploration, helping that person to understand what they're good at, what they're not so good at, and how that all comes together to help them to be successful in a job. For some of our people, we do a lot of youth, and we have a lot of youth who have never worked. We actually have a lot of older people that have never worked either, unfortunately. And so not having any idea of what goes on in a world to work, they're coming out of school, which is a very structured environment, into a work environment that's very unstructured. And so, they have not had the opportunity to really learn how to structure their day, structure their life. So we have a job seeking skill training program to help people to learn successful work skills, the soft skills that are so important. And the reason that so many people lose their jobs, how do they get along with their coworkers? How do they get along with their supervisor? How do they take feedback? How do they, manage their anger, their, difficulty with attention, all these things that are just so important in helping to keep a job. We do a lot of internships out in the community and let people go out and do a job in a volunteer kind of role, but at a real business, so they can kind of practice some of the things that they've learned. And it helps them to also kind of look at, is this really what I want to do? A lot of people have an idea of, this is what I want to do, and then they get out there and do it, and it's like, yeah, that's not what I thought it was. So we just kind of really try to help that, because it's hard for a person with a disability to get a job. And once they get that job, we really don't want them to lose it, because that is just so defeating to them, that they tried and they failed, and they failed at a lot of things. So we really want to really build success. Next slide. This is for youth with disability. We have a living center, and it's a very short-term independent living skill training program. It teaches them all about living in the community, engaging in their community. They learn how to cook for themselves, cleaning, budgeting, home maintenance, but as well as that is recreational activities. And, how do you get out in your community and participate and be safe? We do a lot of self-maintenance, again, hygiene, laundry, punctuality, medication management, again, so important in, being successful in the job is being able to, take your medicine, be able to reorder your medicine, see your doctors and things like that. So again, it's kind of teaching people how to do that who've never had the opportunity. As Marcus said, being able to get to work is a huge barrier to a lot of people. And especially for the people that we serve in Southern Illinois, it's really huge. We have a certified driver's rehab specialist. We have the only one south of 64 in Illinois. We do driver's evaluations and training. We teach road safety. We also do adaptive equipment prescriptions. So if someone, this program serves people of all ages, but if someone, say, had a stroke and they can no longer use, part of their body, we help them to learn the adaptive equipment they need on their car so that could, and teach them how to use it so that they can remain, being able to be independent and transport around in the community. For our younger drivers, a lot of high schools don't have the equipment that are needed for people with disabilities to get their driver's license. So we work with a lot of young people and we help them to get their license, which is just another ability to be able to maintain a successful job. Next slide. Our job development and placement program, we have a milestone program, which is for people who are pretty much ready to go to work. They can be successful with minimal assistance. They've worked in the past. They, have had jobs. They just, have to change jobs for whatever reason. And so, they're pretty much good to go. We have a support employment program for people with most significant needs. And most of our programs do work with people with most significant needs. This program helps people to find those jobs, but we also provide job coaching on the job, where people go out and they help the employer and they help the client to set up the things that are needed for them to be successful. We help train them. A lot of times employers who are, don't have a lot of employees, don't have the time that they need to train people. So we go and do that. And we know that client very well. And so we just kind of help them, and then we fade out as they become more independent. We fade out with the goal of them being completely independent. We have an employability development program, which also works with returning citizens who are coming back and trying to get settled back into society. We help them to find a job and work with employers to help them to overcome some of those barriers. We, in working with employers, we have pretty much a one-on-one employment kind of concept, which is if the person, we're working with a person and they have a job goal, we help to find a company that could match that. And conversely, when we work with a company and they've hired somebody, very often they will come back and say, hey, I need somebody else. This guy was really good. Can you give me someone else? So it really is a win-win situation in that we help a lot of people, to obtain employment. And very often once a company, has a success with a person with a disability, they get it. It's like a light bulb. Making those relationships with employers is so important. It's got to be a good trust relationship. Our working with employers also help us to develop our internships and help us to give people the opportunity to go out and to try jobs, but it also helps the employer to learn that people with disabilities can work and they can do a good job. So that's just kind of, how we kind of meet the needs. I will say that there are a whole community of community providers throughout Illinois that would be happy and willing to work with any employer to bring someone out to help them train people, to help them work with people with disabilities. Next slide. Some of the things that we look at, I know here at the Career Pathways for Targeted Populations, we did have a Bridging the Gap program, which was 100% successful, where we help people coming out of high school to determine a career pathway. We assisted them in all kinds of ways to help them to be successful. And 100% of the people that we help to get into a community college or a university were successful. And one of the other things that we talk about in the career pathways for targeted populations is a non-traditional career pathway, which is finding a way for individuals who learn differently than traditional classroom settings to develop career pathways. I know we talk about this, and it's something that I'm actively pursuing and look forward to continue working with.
Great. Thanks, Donna. And we talked earlier about disability being part of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you also see from your presentation the amount of diversity that exists within disability, and therefore the different kinds of services and supports and programs that are required to support that entire breadth of different people in different situations with disabilities. So thank you for sharing all that, LaDonna. That was great.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to turn it over to Garrett, who's going to talk a little bit about the work they're doing at Ascendant. Garrett?
Awesome. Thank you, David and LaDonna and Marcus. That was awesome. What you said, I'm going to kind of regurgitate as well. Hopefully it's a little bit different. Yeah, everyone, thank you for letting me join today. Just excited to go through our roadmap and our journey here at trying to be a more inclusive employer. And we're going to talk about the last 6 months. I started at Ascendant last April, and we're already gaining traction within the network. And we're going to talk about what that traction looks like and also tell you how we got there. I think as a provider, right, there's some things that you can maybe take from these slides to, entice businesses to know that this is the future of business. And that's how I regurgitated out to our team internally to build the why. Because it's not Garrett doing this initiative at Ascendant, it's all of us. So David, if you could go to the next slide for me. To start, biggest thing is went from Bizarre, 100 employees, to Ascendant, which is around 6,000 plus. So right off the bat, completely different beast. How do you create the buy-in to do diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility within the workplace? And you kind of have to draw the line in the sand and say, and how I did that was I met with Tim Engstrom and our executive leadership team at Ascendant. I said, team, what are we doing? You are the champions. This is my thoughts and feelings behind this, but you have to be just as much bought into this as I am, because we won't move the needle. So as you can see here, team, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion within Ascendant, this is all parties, right? This is all marginalized populations of people that have barriers getting into the workplace. And why this scope is so important is because in the past, we were just focusing on one group of people. And so having our team think differently about recruiting and this talent model is important, because the more diverse we can be, the more successful we're going to be as an organization, not just from getting top tier talent, but then also creating a more just diverse workplace internally here at Ascendant. So as you can see here, we have total rewards, we have field HR, talent acquisition, legal, and operations. Legal was probably the toughest one I had to get through, but I knocked enough, and they came around. Good example is we didn't have closed captioning on our town hall meetings within our supply chain and anything. I had to enable closed captioning so that we could have people. We don't have anyone who is deaf currently within our corporate headquarters, but I said, team, we got to start being more accessible. So that was just one thing where legal was like, oh yeah, you're not doing anything wrong. We just got to turn it on because it's going to lead to a more inclusive workplace. So next slide, David. So as we talk about, the journey, right? It's one thing in the last slide to say, this is the line in the sand, here's how we're going to, this is what we're going to do. But then how do you get there? And as an employer who's coming into a new organization, seen as the subject matter expert, it's once again, it's not Garrett, it's all of us doing inclusion, right? We all have skin in the game. So to start, I just ran a needs assessment throughout the network to see what was the engagement around inclusion, because I could be really engaged, but my counterparts could not be. And that's something I wanted to kind of unpack. And so just ran an assessment, I gave it to the executive leadership team. I said, hey, teams, this is kind of where I think we would have the most success with inclusion, just based upon just understanding where our current, baseline was. From there, I presented the why. why are we doing alternative hiring? Why should it be a part of our initiative as an organization? From there, I got the sign off. By sign off, meaning I got people who could then help support this initiative through time. We don't hire external consultants. I actually want to get away from that. I think if you're going to do inclusion, it needs to be something that is built out internally. You could have subject matter experts that help out externally, but it's really important to get the vendors involved, to get their input, but then also us driving this initiative. We determined pilot facilities. We have 32 facilities nationally. So we are piloting one in each region. Carroll Stream and our corporate headquarters in Deerfield, we are not piloting there yet because truly they're just not ready. And they need to see the return on investment on why this initiative is so important. Because by no means do I want to set people up for failure. That's actually the last thing I want to do. When you do this, you want to do it right, because it's based on, like LaDonna said, relationships and trust. And then from there, we developed internal teams. We're actually redoing our recruiting process, our onboarding process, our sustainability plan within the facilities, kind of a framework for facility leaders on how to do inclusion. And then we're doing our own sensitivity training on site. So taking all of the information from our vendors, and we're going to own it. We're going to go on site and so forth. And then, as you see here, grassroots recruiting. We do a weekly email chain. I was actually just out in Paris, California last week. We had 15 nonprofits on site. We did an open house, and we were just very transparent. We said, hey, team, we don't know this. We're going down this journey, and we want to learn from you. And kind of creating that framework as in it's us. Because in California, I had ran into different barriers, and so I'm learning state to state. It's a lot different than Illinois, and it's kind of its own framework with those dollars and where they're put. The next is storytelling. We've had success. We launched last month. We have a supply chain town hall event where leaders within these different parts of our organization, it's a part of our monthly calls. Now we're not just talking about numbers, but now we're talking about people. So you have people and process, and that really drives the change internally. And then we're also building out the dashboards as well. So everyone that we brought on board, they've not just only self-identified, but it's something where we can start tracking our tenure and turnover rate, because if I can say, the proof is in the pudding, that's going to give us more dollars to really drive this initiative. As you can see here, change will only be done by universal design. I'll get into the standard operating procedures and what that looks like. Which we celebrate, I call them small wins, small gains. Any milestone of a new hire and a success, we need to celebrate. And I tell the team, everyone is a part of inclusion. So even if you don't have 12 years of experience in education, you bring something to the table, and we need to hear it. Next slide, Dave. And then the last one is, keys to success, standard operating procedures. My job is not just inclusive hiring, it's getting my hands dirty in the warehouse and redoing all the SOPs. So when you bring in these vendors, we want to make sure we have documents for job coaches on how to follow our steps. And they're visually designed and appealing, where there's verbal cues within the pictures, and then also concrete step-by-step instructions with action verbs of the task that is assigned to that individual through those SOPs. That drives the initiative. Without your SOPs, when you bring a job coach in, probably not going to have a success, because we don't know what is needed of that individual. I know that's really big, and I know it's good for any business, right? That's just purely needed to run a more effective business. The next is trust with community partners. We wine and dine them. We bring them on site. We tour them. They get to see our facility. It's an open door policy. Businesses need to rethink how they communicate with their community, and we're reshaping that as we talk. And it's an open door. The next is we do startup meetings. We have the whole lean initiative where we have peer-to-peer recognition, and we talk about forecasting of that job and what is asked of that department for that day. That's a really good accommodation. Not really accommodation. It's seen like that, but it's more or less just a response accommodation to making sure everyone's on the same page. But it really creates inclusion where you're bringing people from an out-group mentality and bringing them in so that they're part of the team as a whole, right? And so that, to me, has been a huge shift in our success. And like you said, early wins. We've had 4 hires in the last 3 weeks in Paris, California. We just hired the first deaf associate out in Massachusetts. We're on a Teams channel right now with our team. They were at a job fair for the state of Massachusetts, and they're teamsing me, and we're working together to make sure that we have 4 interviews today. So when you get people who were unsure and you bring them on board internally, they are just as excited and amped up as I am, which, really, sets the tone for what we're trying to do here to send them. But by no means, we are not experts. We are building the ship as we're in flight, and we are scraping our needs. But I think when you do inclusion, there's never going to be a great time. There's always going to be the fear. The support of ERGs to drive the change is important, but it's on businesses to own, especially in 2022. And there's no reason why businesses shouldn't have more skin in the game and to make this a part of who they are. So, Dave, that's all I got. Feel free to open up for questions.
Yeah. Thanks, Garrett. There are a couple of comments in the chat while you were talking about closed captioning and how that's valuable to even to non-deaf people participating. And I think this whole idea that you touched on of universal design, like even here, standard operating procedures, that's useful for any employee that you're hiring, any employee that you're trying to hold accountable. And so while this program might be the thing that drives that happening, it's going to benefit your entire employee base and make the company more successful across that. And I think I think there's a lot of things that when you design that way, you can come up with great answers that work for everybody. Great. So thank you, Marcus, LaDonna, Garrett. We're going to now turn to some questions and get a little perspective from each of the speakers on 5 or 6 different topics. So we're going to start with the very beginning of the process. So how do you start the conversation between an employer and a community partner, whether that's the state or a CRP, about the feasibility and the process for employing individuals with disabilities? And Marcus, I know your team is out starting a lot of these conversations. So could you start first and give us some thoughts, and then LaDonna and Garrett would be great. You might be muted there, Marcus.
Sorry about that. What we like to do, or how we like to start conversations, is to find out what are the qualifications of a particular job. What is the employer looking for? We're not going to say that every individual that we work with would be capable of doing every job, but if we know what's out there, we could now market it to not only our customers, but we could look at a better match for the employer.
Great, right. If you don't know what the employer needs, it's hard to fill the job.
Right.
LaDonna?
Yeah. So we just kind of start conversations, and again, we kind of go with it from both ways. If we have a client who needs a job and we have an employer that has an opening, we go in and we talk about the job, we talk about the skills that our client has. Sometimes the client will just want to go in and sell themselves, and so we prep them for that, and we help them and kind of send them on in. So but we always talk about the successes that we've had prior and how this person's skills can fit in. If we don't have a specific client, but we just want to make a relationship with an employer, we just go in and we talk about what kind of jobs they have, what kind of needs they have. We look around with them. We're always interested in their business, which they are always willing to talk about. And sometimes we can look at something and say, wow, we have a person that could do this, and that would free up some time for this person you're paying a lot of money to do this at a lesser expense, and sometimes to help them kind of with their bottom line. We also talk about the tax incentives that are available for people, because that's often also something that's people are looking for.
Yeah, I was just going to go off that. I mean, that, LaDonna, you hit on the head, right? As a business who's already going down this journey, we're kind of not ahead of the game, but our outlook is different, where we're bought in. But there is a lot of misperceptions, as everyone knows on this call, biases, the sense of there's this liability, right? That's not true at all. And so, our goal as a business is to educate other businesses, right? And we're already doing that within our pilot facilities, is working with other businesses where they're now coming on site and they're seeing the work that we're doing with our current associates that we got from vendors. And they're like, oh, wow, this is possible, right? So I think our job as businesses, and I know, Dave, you talked with Tim, my superior on this, is how do we get businesses to just have as much skin in the game? And the only way to do that is them owning it and knowing that this is the future of work. So, but LaDonna, you said it, it's all about the dollars, the numbers, and how they can, truly affect, the right way to do business. But awesome work.
Right. And it is the job, it is the business, the broader business need. And then it's also acknowledging the fears that people have and making sure that you're proactive about talking about things that people will be nervous about in this situation. So it's really all of that sort of both wants and needs that are important.
And what we find as well is that when, we, have a lot of successes, and those employers are more than willing to talk to other employers.
Yeah.
And so, kind of reaches out and they help to educate their own community, which is, real important.
Great. Molly, can we move on to question 2? So we've all three of you talked about the importance of collaboration in creating these kinds of programs. But some collaborations are more successful than others. And when you try to enter into a collaboration, whether it's a new business or with another organization, what are the kinds of barriers that you run into? And I think, obviously after that, what do you do about that? LaDonna, you want to just start there, since I know that's a big part of your operation?
So when the barriers we face when we're trying to, like with an employer, David?
With an employer or in a collaboration with another organization that might be providing the supportive living services or something like that you've got to work with in order to get someone successful. Okay.
Yeah, there can be a lot of barriers, unfortunately. We are really trying, I think we're, and Marcus, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're trying to make a better collaboration with Marcus's team and trying to figure out, since we all have the same goals, how do we get there? We're working with the same customers. Working with transportation providers can sometimes be very difficult in just the way things are set up in the state. I found that most people that work with people with disabilities very much want to do things, and it's sometimes the structure of the organizations that are kind of preventing some of the collaboration efforts.
Yeah, I know I can. Oh, LaDonna, will you finish? I know if you're going to say anything else.
Yes, no, go ahead.
And it's for us as a business, it's flexibility, right? And that can go from, the biggest thing is you go into this initiative, right? I call it the honeymoon phase, where I do the sensitivity training, team is jam-packed, and they just think they're going to get this onslaught or this just multiple candidates coming through the door. I'm like, team, it doesn't work like that. It's case by case basis. They have caseloads, right? So what we try to do is educate what vendors and what their role is. But then what we do is we try to stay consistent with our communication. So through our pilot facilities, we're talking about not just our weekly job openings, but we also talk about stuff we're doing in the community. And so if there's things where the vendor needs to, maybe they have a multiple individuals or clients but they just want to do an informational interview because they're just starting their job readiness piece, right? I told our ops team we need to be flexible. We cannot just do it this way because we've been doing it for 20 years. So now that I'm part of these conversations throughout the network, is I'm having them come up with strategies to how to bring people in, even if it's through, just a tour, right? We need to be flexed on how we do business. And the top barrier is just getting people. But what I tell them, it's not just going to be 20 people at once. Every person needs to be the right fit for their job. And we need to trust the vendors that they know how to do their job, because they do, right? And so we just need to start interviewing them and screen them. If we get a candidate, we automatically screen them. And there is no buts. If LaDonna sends Garrett Rossick, a candidate, a client, we're going to interview them no matter what, because she is a subject matter expert on how to help people rehabilitate or get the services they need to be successful. But businesses need to adapt and know that it's okay that they don't have, this is not something that you micromanage. This is something that is organically developed over time.
Marcus, do you have anything to add? I know DRS works quite closely.
A lot of what we find out is resources. Because even though we have several different agencies, several different employers, sometimes individuals may need certain information. They may need some sort of resources. So we have to be able to find out how to collaborate with businesses, with municipalities, so we could work out, especially in Southern Illinois, where we're talking about transportation, how to get the customer from, and even though it may seem like it's 1 mile away, that is a hardship for some of our customers. We have had businesses that is willing to relocate bus stops in various things, so which makes it easier for our customers to get back and forth. And what we're finding out is, if we're trying to arrange some sort of transportation, not only for our customers, if other agencies may have customers there, they'll be able to benefit from the added transportation needs that we work with, or everybody else is working with also.
Right, that's another sort of universal design thing. You change bus stops, and actually it helps a lot of other people to get jobs too, not just the people with disabilities. And you guys all talked a lot about change, and I think the importance of building trust with your partners so that you can develop that collaboration and investing in that. Great, Molly. Question 3. Before we jump into question 3, I do want to remind all the participants, if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat or the Q&A box, so that we'll come to answer those at the end here. So question 3. So we've talked a lot about the needs to try to get people into these roles. What kind of services exist that you can call on, or that you've been successful calling on for help to help you find the right people, prepare them, and get them hired? Garrett, you want to start with this one?
So with this, I think as a business perspective, right, there's always a vendor attached to a client if it's through a community partner, a community resource partner. What we do is, if there's any sort of support that's needed from job coaching, where that's something that, as we know, it's faded over a group of time, depending if it's supported employment or integrated competitive employment, the biggest piece is that we're always going to, I call it the wraparound effect. That as my HR business partner who's on site, what we leverage is that vendor to help us and clarify any questions or supports that we might have. We cover the accommodations on site because, as I've been telling our team, accommodations are not that truly expensive. For example, we hired someone in Arizona who has one arm, and he was a forklift. He did 50-50 inventory control, which is he would count the inventory. He needed a left-handed keyboard. So what we did was we just purchased a left-handed keyboard. We used Jan, Job Accommodation Network. He didn't even know what the left-handed keyboard was. So he was ecstatic. But then what we also did, we had to work with maintenance. We didn't modify our cherry picker, but we added another horn to the left so that he could use his knee. Right there, that was just done through collaboration internally, and then also asking the person if they needed anything else to truly run that equipment successfully. But I tell our team, leverage the partners, right? Because as a for-profit company, time is difficult. And time isn't difficult. It's something that we think we don't have enough of. But if you truly want to do inclusion, you have to make the time. And so what we do is we leverage the partners, David, as much as possible. So it's not just a hire. It's that employee life cycle. Now, I know 90 days depends on what their contract is with the state, but that doesn't mean that we stop communicating. We will actually over communicate. So if we need anything, and I think for businesses, that's something that we don't think about. We just think of partners as a referral team, which is actually not the case at all. So we actually educate our team internally of how to leverage that just by that trust and communication, because we are not the experts, but we're here to learn. So I don't know if Dave, that answered your question, but some of the stuff that we've leveraged internally to drive the change.
Yeah, that's great. And Marcus, I know that DRS does a lot of work trying to build support around people as they get new jobs. Who do you guys see as supportive partners that businesses could call to try to get help starting a program or helping to make people successful?
I like the fact that Gary did mention Jan, which jobs accommodation, just like there's not a universal state agency beyond Division of Rehabilitation Services, but we do subcontract a lot of our work, job coaches, any interpreters. We will do that. So if an employer is looking for any support services and they may need just the first step, we will make sure that we will assist that and provide them with information how to secure support services. We may also arrange those for them depending on what their needs are. And we could assist with the purchasing, not necessarily for the company, but we do provide assistive technology for our customers. And if the service is there for the customer, we will purchase the service for the customer, which in fact will aid the business itself.
And LaDonna, you talked a lot about the services that the EDC provides. Beyond that, what do you see as other services that are available to help employers?
Well, as I talked about, there's a whole network of us providers out there that are more than happy to, go into the businesses to help them to evaluate what their needs are, to help train employees. We've been asked even we'd be in there, well, what about this guy? How can we help him? And it's not even our client, but, we'll try to help them to, figure out what they can do to, kind of help everyone else. And, sometimes it's just even to how do we get our other staff to, communicate or coexist well with this person with a disability that, a lot of people have, a lot of thoughts that, people with disabilities can't work or they can't do, or, whatever. And so, I know that this whole network of people, in Illinois are more than happy to work with businesses to provide any type of supported services.
Great, thanks. And I would encourage people to just ask, businesses to just ask. I think a lot of organizations have supportive services. One thing that we discovered up here in Northern Illinois is that PACE, the suburban bus system, has a training program on how to ride the bus. So if someone needs transportation, those kinds of programs can be really helpful. Like, where do I get on it? How do the schedules work? How do I pay for it? Things like that. So I think asking potential partners, I think you'd be surprised what you might find.
What we also do too, Dave, is we try to have follow-up meetings. So every 30 and 90 days for a new associate. We just had one yesterday in Paris where I sat in with the HR manager and the partner and the client, right? And we had a conversation on how they were doing the first 30 days, right? That builds trust from our perspective with the nonprofit or vendor, and then it keeps everyone in the loop. When you're working through inclusion and all these different functions, like you said, we need to over communicate as businesses, but actually, like you said, that makes us just a better business, right? And so, and it leads to employee longevity and mitigates turnover. You said that spot on. And another tool that, we try to leverage as much as possible, and those are uncomfortable conversations sometimes, but you need to have those uncomfortable conversations to really move the needle.
Great. Thanks. Let's move on to the next question. I'm going to skip this one actually, just to make sure we have time for the for audience questions. So we'll just move on to the last question. If each of the presenters could share with us a success story, whether that's a person or a business or a program that you have worked on or have seen that you think is particularly successful. So Marcus, you want to start us on this one?
Yes, it's a combination of all three. We do have a Walgreens distribution center here in Southern Illinois that we were working with. One of the participants of the program, their mother was an HR manager for the local hospital. She used her influence, the fact that we were using job coaches at Walgreens to implement programs at the hospital. She's also to the point where I would say she's one of our #1 fans, because she does not only share the story of her daughter's success, but also the success that we have within their facility and the value of working with individuals with disabilities.
Oh, yeah, that's a great story to see how success breeds success in other places, both for individuals, but also to be able to broaden the kinds of jobs and the kinds of roles you can offer.
Yes.
LaDonna?
Gosh, we have so many, and so many people that have gone on and really followed their dream. And but I think the one that gets me is one that's happening right now. Actually, we have a young man that came in, and when he came, he has autism, and he came in and he would talk maybe 3 words. That was about it. We've had him for 4 weeks, and we're really working with him. And last week he started calling AMC theaters and asking for a job. And seeing his mother calls us and is just crying because she just can't believe it. And so it just kind of highlights that the upfront work in a lot of cases really help down the line. So I'm really excited to see where this young man goes, and just blessed to be a part of his life.
Yeah, it's amazing how with just a small amount of supports, people can, do pretty amazing things that, had been really hard for them before. So Gary, why don't you take us, wrap this up on question 5, a success story?
Yeah. I would say I just sent some pictures to Molly. We had our first open house last week in Paris, which is 2 vendors, right? And 2 chambers of commerce and so forth. And it's a new model. In our pilot facilities, I am cold calling vendors, and they think I am a nonprofit. And I have to reiterate that I am not a nonprofit. I am a for-profit company. And they're like, why are you calling? And I'm like, well, this is what we're doing. So over the past 4 months, I've been trying to get in touch with Department DRO for state of California. Had a lot of difficulties, even leveraged some of my connections with the state of Illinois to see if we could help out. Shout out to Biswa. And we had trouble. Went in last week and I was solicited. I went out in the community for 3 days in California, and we had over 15 nonprofits come on site for our open house. So went knocking on Tuesday and Wednesday. They showed up on Thursday. I just sent Molly some pictures of it. We had a virtual ASL interpreter on site to show, because we had some people through the state of California who were deaf. So we wanted to make sure that we had that accommodation. And it was a huge success. It was such a huge success that my senior VP was like, hey, we got to launch this at our hub facilities, which is one of them's Carroll Stream. And I was like, hold on, Tim, we got to go slow before we can go fast. But it's a different way of recruiting. It's a different way of bringing vendors together, because I think in the past it was, I have my caseload, this is what I need to do. And I was like, well, we can all win here, right? Because if I can create more jobs, all the vendors could win, right? And then we could all collaborate to find the best thing. So I think it's just a way of, and it was a huge success. And I didn't run it. Our facility leaders ran it in Paris. So training the trainer so that they are just as much about this as I am, because that's how you do inclusion a correct way. So just a really awesome success story, and glad, because shot in the dark and it worked out.
Fantastic. Thanks all of the participants for answering those questions and for your insights into that. I think it's really a lot of great information there. But I do want to open this up for the audience. And if there are any questions or any topics that you'd like to see either one or all of the participants dig into a little more deeply, please enter those into the chat, or or into the Q&A box. I think either one of those will work. People another couple minutes to write their detailed questions into the chat. Let me see. So, well, if there are no, are there any questions? I want to make sure we respond to the things that you guys are interested in here today.
Sarah posted one. Sarah said, what should the state workforce system invest in?
Oh, great question. Yeah, we talked about the $120 million of WIOA money, and there's other funding as well. For Illinois, or more broadly, where do you think the best opportunities are for investment today? LaDonna, thoughts?
Well, I know that people coming out of sheltered workshops is a huge issue. And I think, again, people who have not ever, really worked out in the community, I think, providing them with some of the upfront things that they need in order to be successful in a competitive, integrated work environment would be, I think, a good use. And, David, as we've talked about, I think the non-traditional career pathways is, definitely something that I think we should, really try to work on.
Yeah, I saw the number recently, but I don't remember, but certainly several thousand people will be moving out of sheltered workshops looking for opportunities in integrated or supported employment, and building the infrastructure to train and support them as they're successful is clearly a big area for investment as we work on that. Garrett, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, that's kind of the exciting part of what I'm telling our team internally. Like, you should see an uptick in just vendors wanting to work with us from a business perspective. And I think, being on the shoes of a business, right? I think we could train other businesses. And I think that there's something that if we can, as vendors, not just educate businesses, but give them an actual process of how this will go, right? Because we say, hey, we can, supply candidates, but there's still that fear, right? Oh, we can do training. Oh, there's still that fear. But what I've realized internally going to a huge organization is really developing the roadmap of what we need to get done and what pieces need to be put in place before we launch was something that it got the fear away. And yes, seen as someone who understands this line of business is key to drive the change, right? But I think, how do we not just educate businesses, but then also give them the framework? And every business is different. So I understand that would be difficult, but giving some sort of blueprint where as of someone in voc rehab, be like, hey, because of these numbers, you're already having trouble finding people. Well, here's a blueprint of how to do it, and I can get you in touch with all the vendors in your area to then drive that initiative, right? So, and I think there's going to be more and more room for HR business leaders and accessibility court. Like, that's only going to grow within HR. It's already going in that direction. There's just such a large gap in education that needs to be done, because you're connecting corporate and nonprofit to corporate, and we're all doing the same thing. But it's hard to, transition from teaching to maybe working in corporate and vice versa. So how do we just keep bridging that gap? I don't know if that answered your question, Dave, but my point of view.
No, I think that's right. We've talked throughout here a little bit about fear. And one of the things that can help people get over the fear is hearing and learning from businesses that have been successful and have seen the results and have recognized that it's not that big a hurdle once you kind of get organized around it. And we're actually planning the Career Pathways Group to have our next webinar, and it's going to be targeted at businesses with exactly that purpose of trying to help them understand what's possible in collaboration with other organizations. So great, Marcus, any thoughts on investment or areas to focus on?
I would say make more monies available, not only for hands-on training, but the development of training and staff, more job coaches, more people who can support the worker on the job, more training where a person who will come in with virtually no or very limited skills will have enough support where there will give that luxury that so they can train, so they can get the supports in services that they need to become an outstanding employee.
Yeah, and I think we're all familiar with some of the salary cap issues and pay issues that have made it hard to recruit for those on the ground roles that really are essential to making someone successful. So clearly that's an opportunity as well. So we one more question in the Q&A, and this is for Garrett specifically. Hey, if I've got someone looking for a job in Carroll Stream, how do we get in touch?
Yeah, what we'll do, Craig, is we like to do a tour first and bring you on site just to see our facility, do a presentation. So what I can do is we can set up, I'm going to put my email in the chat, would love to connect, and then we can go from there. But yeah, no, I mean, biggest thing is we are learning. So great, we love your expertise, but how we do it is we wine and dine them, you know, we bring you on site, bring a tour, we'd have lunch, you talk to our building leader, he gets to know more about your role, because it's not just us bringing you on site, it's you educating our team. Because I can educate, but sometimes it's nice coming from the person in your shoes. So they realize like the light bulb goes out. Like, oh, wow, this is a lot of hard work that Garrett's trying to get off like up and running. So yeah, Craig, let me, Molly has my contact info. We can reach out and we're here to learn too. So anything that we can do better when you come on site, like David said, we want to learn too. So thank you, Craig.
Awesome. With that, Molly, I think the next page actually does have everybody's email address on it. So thank you, Marcus, LaDonna, Garrett. Very interesting conversation. I really appreciate your time, and participants really appreciate your time today as well. I hope you found this interesting and took at least a few things away that will help you as you move forward, helping to find jobs for people with disabilities and other people around the state. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I am going to put a link to that survey that I mentioned at the start of the webinar in the chat. So if you want to do this while it's top of your mind right now, I just threw that survey into the chat. If not, you'll be getting the survey tomorrow regardless. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll keep this open for another minute if you want to grab that survey link, and you will have a follow-up email from us soon.